I am watching a couple of loonies here on the other side of the glass, dancing with glee to the music. And is that because this is the last broadcast of the year? I don't know, but we're all looking forward to taking a week off, and that's standard for standard reason. We don't have work that is not absolutely necessary. Few people will come in and count checks and that kind of thing. But between Christmas and New Year's, from the very beginning of the organization, we've just offered that as a bonus week to be with family and celebrate Christmas together. And not everybody gets to do that, but we do that at Stand to Reason. And maybe that's why they're jumping around. And in fact, this broadcast will be released on Friday, which would be Christmas Eve. And so I have some thoughts a little bit about Christmas that I want to launch out with, and then maybe I'll bookend with a few things just as we close our final session for this year. But I'd like to talk about some things that I've been reflecting on recently regarding my own personal feelings about about Christmas. And in a sense, I guess I have a kind of confession to make. And that is, for a long time now, I've been having some difficulty getting into, I'm just going to call it the spirit of Christmas, okay? And I've often wondered why, and I've given it some thought, and that thought is captured here in these reflections. And it might be that some of you will relate, having had the same difficulty. And by the way, even mentioning the phrase spirit of Christmas raises some issues, doesn't it? Because it's usually in the context of criticizing the excesses of the holiday season. I mean, Christmas season used to start, it seems to me, when I was a kid, after Thanksgiving. And now it seems Thanksgiving has been lost altogether, and it's swallowed up in an ever-expanding Christmas commercial period that devours 1/6 of our calendar year. Now, even before Halloween, you see Christmas stuff. And in my mind, that's kind of pathetic in a way. And the way many people respond to that is they bemoan the loss of the true meaning of Christmas. Or, as I mentioned earlier, maybe they're bemoaning the loss of the spirit of Christmas. But what's offered frequently as the true meaning of, or the spirit of Christmas, is almost as pathetic as what it replaces. Now, I'm not speaking here about Christians characteristically, or maybe I should be more precise and say I'm not speaking characteristically of followers of Christ here, but of the larger crowd, some of those who identify as Christians and many of those who are outside of that, who see something else, something deeper in Christmas than just the commercialism, all right? But they'll say something like, well, the true meaning of Christmas, and you'll see these in movies and in commercials, you'll see it stated, well, it's about giving. The true meaning of Christmas is about love and joy and peace and goodwill to men and that kind of thing. So on this view of the season, one could kind of imagine God saying, well, it's that time of year again, Christmas, the season of giving, the season of joy and peace and goodwill towards men. Let's see, how can I celebrate this year? I have an idea. I'll become a man and sacrifice myself as a gift to mankind, and that will be my gift during this time of goodwill on earth and peace toward men. That would be the fitting statement for this season. I mean, that's silly, right? But it seems like that's almost the way the spirit of Christmas ends up being communicated. If it's not about God first, but about giving and love and joy and the like first. So, and it's not that any of these things like peace and giving and whatever are pathetic in themselves, but I think they pale in significance to the event which authored Christmas 2,000 years ago. And the point is that it's God's miraculous act of incarnation that's the very foundation of those things characteristic of Christmas. If there's time today, I'm going to read a little bit about that out of the story of reality, and I'm going to read about the most famous Christmas verse that you'll never find on a Christmas card. I'll get to that later on in the show. But the point is God's acting, an act he authored, one that he gives substance to and meaning and context. And so to talk about the true meaning of Christmas and not focus on Jesus is kind of like admiring the Roma and ignoring the meal, to use a metaphor. And if I can kind of turn a literary reference on its side a bit, it's like the clothes without the emperor. It reduces Christmas to packages given in love, beautifully wrapped, ribboned, but nothing inside. And that is pathetic because of what is lost. It's a pathetic trade-off. So I understand the substance of Christmas. And now, without that substance, the spirit of Christmas goes begging, so to speak. But I want to turn this around and look from just a little different angle for a moment. Bring me back to the earlier comment I made about the difficulty I have in getting into the spirit of Christmas lately, even though I, as a Christian, 48 years now, I do have a deeper understanding of its true substance. But to be very candid with you, when I think about Christmas, especially about the emotional significance it has for me, I think very little about Jesus. Clearly, he's the center of the season. But I'm just talking about what emotionally moves me. And that is, I think of the 20 Christmases or so I spent in the first 20 years of my life with a dozen or so people that deeply defined what the Christmas spirit is for me. And in this sense, I'm not speaking of Christmas in a theological way. Please understand that. I'm speaking of it in an emotional way. I'm making that distinction. And I'm not saying the emotions are the most important. They're not. The theological elements are the most important, but the emotional elements are where many of us live, especially in this season. And that is what made Christmas feel a certain way that it doesn't feel anymore. And for me as a kid, I think the beautiful thing about Christmas was that it was always the same. It was a kind of a still point in the changing fortunes of this young person's world. Because in Christmas, I always knew what to expect. There was this sameness and consistency of that holiday, and it created a deep sense of safety for me and a delicious sense of anticipation for me. And this is what I think most people mean when they talk about their Christmas traditions. It's these things that they do over and over. Every year it's the same, and it establishes a kind of character and a feeling of an expected good thing that our hearts rejoice in. And on those nights, on Christmas Eve, my grandmother and my grandfather would come by, Papa and Nani, we called them. They'd arrive on Christmas Eve, and my mom and dad were there. The 5 kids were there. There was a ragtag assembly of visitors and relatives and friends. And then as we grew older, there were sweethearts, and the house was chaotic, but it was a kind of pleasant sort of chaos. My mom was the one responsible for the clever decorations, and there was kind of a homespun warmth about the house mixed with the scent of pine cones because she would burn these little incense things. And on Christmas Eve, of course, many presents were already there under the tree in kind of a disarray. We had festive drinks, hot cocoa, eggnog, that kind of stuff. The adults drank other sorts. There were lots of tasty things to nibble. There were always a few Christmas carols, Dad's baritone, and Mom singing harmony, the kids all singing off-key. But, I know better now. Nothing seemed really planned, but it was. And it was magical for me. And then Christmas morning, when it dawned, there was another ritual that was repeated every year. All 9 of us, that would be the 5 kids, Mom and Dad, Nani and Papa, that was the core group, would station ourselves in a kind of semicircle around what looked like a mountain of gifts that seemed to have erupted during the enchanted evening while we were asleep. And my grandfather, Papa, played Santa, and he'd creak around the tree like an old squirrel rummaging for nuts, grabbing parcels and picking it up as a treasure that he examined carefully, and then grunted his ho-ho-ho and extended his arms and squinted through the glasses perched on the end of his nose and announced the fortunate recipient and deposited the bundle in their arms. And we were not financially well off as a family. In fact, I think we were poor. I know we were. But somehow, as the dawn gave way to morning and the pile of booty at our feet grew, it was just like gifts everywhere. No one was allowed to open anything until Papa had whittled the mountain down box by box, and then we'd go in a circle and open one present apiece in turn, and sharing each other's discovery and going round and round the circle until the last gift was gone. And it seemed like it took all day. In fact, sometimes it did. We were into the afternoon and we were still opening presents, and it was wonderful. And that's what the Christmas spirit is, or actually was, functionally for me. And I don't think it will ever be the same again. Okay, those days are gone. And even with my own girls, it's different than when I was a child, because now I am not. Now I'm a man. Now I'm an adult. Now I'm one responsible for that. All of those things that happened magically for us as a family so many years ago. And the world looks very different from this end of life. And in the meantime, I can only catch snatches of that kind of Christmas feeling. Now, to be clear, becoming a Christian has changed my life profoundly, but it hasn't, for me, changed Christmas. For me, becoming a Christian didn't add as much of a new dimension to Christmas as it did a new dimension to my whole life, which included every day on the calendar. I comprehend the substance of Christmas as I never have before. And as I mentioned, it's tragic when that substance is lost to some substitute, the so-called spirit of Christmas, love, joy, peace, that kind of stuff. No, it's not about that. It's about the one who provides love, joy, and genuine peace to the world. So I guess if you look at the traditions, for many of us, the feeling of the season has to do with those things, what we're raised with, those traditions, those warm and meaningful events, the songs and the smells, and the sounds and the movies and the people and the decorations. And we can reproduce that to some degree and grab snatches of what that magic was like for us as a child. I just happened to see, was it last night or the night before? The Christmas Story, okay, about the kid with the BB gun. And there are so many things about that movie were so familiar to me. That was situated in the 40s. My life at that time, that age, was in the 50s, but so much of it rang true for me. And there was that magic for him. But I know that now it's not the same. There's a sweetness to the holiday that's not restricted to religious elements. This is true for all kinds of people who are not religious. And ultimately, as with every other good and perfect thing, that sweetness comes down from above, from the Father of lights during this season of lights. And like Scrooge's second ghost, he's merely, God is dispensing a special grace on unsuspecting recipients, good and evil alike, during this time of year. It's special. So, I guess I'm saying that Christmas can be experienced on a couple of different levels, and each has distinct value in its own right. It has a substance, a specific objective meaning, and that substance is God's gift in Christ. But it also has a feeling, and for people raised in Christian homes, the feeling is associated with the substance, and I think that's wonderful, but it wasn't that way for me. That wasn't the spirit, the emotional sweetness that I experienced, and so many who are not Christians, who don't know Christ, they enjoy that as well. And, in a certain sense, that universal sweetness, that holiday joy, turns out also to be God's gift as well, even to them, even to those who don't know him. That is the grace of God. Anyway, my thoughts, my candid reflections. Greg Kokel here for Stand to Reason. Back in just a moment. All righty. Doesn't sound very Christmassy. You know, in the past, years ago, we used to have these cats doing jingle bells, mew, 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 mew. And it's like I pictured these cats all sitting on a thing and somebody pulling their tails in rhythm to the notes. Jerk one tail, mew, 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 mew. You're like you're milking a cow, but you're actually milking jingle bells out of these cats anyway. Don't go looking for that. We don't need it, but that was a different era. So, all right, let's go back to the calls here. This is Matthew in Milpitas. I say that right, Matthew?
Yes, it's Milpitas.
Where Milpitas? Where's that at?
It's up in the Bay Area. We're a little bit
okay,
north, just a tiny bit north of San Jose.
Okay. So glad you called. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. My first time calling. My mom was very excited because she called you several times when she was in college, and now I'm in college and doing the same thing.
Oh, no kidding. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Great to have you.
Thank you. Well, I was wondering today, because I'm in college, I am meeting a lot of people. As you can imagine, quite a few, given that I just moved back to campus for this last term. And
wait, could you say that last thing again? You meet a lot of people, as I can imagine that what? I missed that last statement.
Oh, well, with COVID, I had just moved back this last fall,
right.
And so I was finally meeting a lot of people.
Are you going to school in the Bay Area?
Yes, I'm
Cal?
At Santa Clara University.
At which one?
Santa Clara University.
Oh,
like
Santa
right
Clara. Okay, got
almost.
it. Sure. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, as I'm meeting a lot of these people, I'm getting to know them, and I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and we were discussing our high school experiences, and he was telling us how he was bullied a lot and ended up not really having many friends during those 4 years of high school.
Uh-huh.
And then where I got a little concerned was when he was talking about that, and he said something along the lines of, well, I'm a pretty good person now, and I think, I did a pretty good job ending up okay after all that bullying.
I gotcha.
And it seemed to me that he was implying he had done it on his own, and to be clear, he's not a believer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of prompted him. I was like, what if that happens again? God forbid. And he said, well, I did it once, so I can do it again. And I asked him, well, what does that mean? What do you mean when you say that?
Sure,
and
good question.
He essentially told me that he knows because he was able to succeed at becoming a good person on his own after such a bad experience. He can do it all over again.
Right.
And I wasn't really sure where to go from there because it sounded wrong, given that at least I believe we can't just, become good people.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't really sure how to witness to him or really what to say in that situation.
Got it. So, well, I have a couple of thoughts about this. And one of them is it does, well, of course, when somebody says I become a good person, they don't probably mean a good person in the perfection sense, okay? They mean, they're basically nice people, and especially if they come from a very, very difficult background, they have survived it well. All right. And I think what he's saying is, I have had really bad experiences and I was able to apply myself in some way to overcome those things and come out reasonably healthy. And if I have to run into those circumstances again, I think I'd have the resources, now that I had then to be able to deal with those problems. My sense of that is he's probably right, because we're not speaking in absolute terms. There's a lot of people who are not Christians that have improved their lives significantly. So, and I think there's nothing wrong with us acknowledging that and even applauding that and then giving them the nod and say, good, I'm glad that you did that. You were able to overcome the tough things. Now, of course, we don't leave it there because we don't want to suggest, as others might, that's it. You've covered the bases. You've finished the job. You've come out of a certain thing, and now you're a good person, all right? They probably are good in according to one standard, not according to God's standards, okay? And so I guess my first impulse would be to applaud their efforts for working hard to overcome a hard thing successfully. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not affirming works-based salvation. I'm just acknowledging something that's true, that I think is true. They worked hard at overcoming something difficult, and they succeeded by and large at that. And I think that's laudatory. There's nothing wrong with affirming that. Plus, in doing so, you are giving appropriate credit where credit is due, and you are laying a kind of a pleasant foundation. Okay, now, but you want to take it further than that. And here's where I'm just thinking for a moment how I would go further with it. I think your initial impulse was to think, well, he thinks he's good enough for God because he overcame this thing, and we know that that's not true. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There's none righteous, not even one, etc., etc. And all our righteous deeds are like filthy rags, Isaiah 64. And so we understand that theologically. The key is that how do we communicate that to this person? And maybe this is where you can applaud them and say, I'm really glad for that. You did a great job. But I wonder if I can ask you a personal question and see what they say. Say, usually if you can ask a personal question, most people are going to say, okay, because they're curious about what you're going to ask. But at least you're asking permission. And I suspect, and here I'm responding, he says yes, so then I would say, I suspect by most people's standards, even by my own, you're probably a really, really sweet guy, a good person, all of that, okay? But here is the question. How do you think you fare according to God's standards? How do you think you fare according to God's standards? And see what he says. Now, the simplest way to characterize God's standards are the Ten Commandments. And because they reflect universal moral obligations for all human beings, I think with one exception, that being the Sabbath, but the rest is pretty straightforward. And this is where I think Ray Comfort has done such a great job by bringing in the law in some significant way so that a person is aware of his or her own liabilities before God. No, they can't keep the law that God has laid before them. The law, James says, is like a mirror. We look into it and we see what we really look like. And so this is what the next step would be. So if you say, how do you think you fare against God's standards? I think you're great, but what do you think God has to say? Then he might say, well, I think God thinks I'm pretty good. And so then if he said that, I'd want to know, well, what do you think God's standards are?
Okay.
Okay.
I see.
This is where you can.
Yeah,
so,
because
this I was going
I
to
had
say.
asked
This is
him,
where you
like,
can bring in the Ten Commandments and ask some very specific questions. Have you ever disobeyed your parents in your life? Have you ever taken something that wasn't yours? Have you ever put anything before God in your life? And on and on and on. Or if they think in terms of Christian ethic, just take Jesus' two great commandments. Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I've asked that of people, and they say, well, have you done those things? Well, I try. Oh, okay, but that wasn't what I asked, but you answered my question. I asked you if you've done it. When you say, have you tried, you're meaning you haven't done it. Now what? And so this is kind of a way of positioning the bad news right there in front of them so that the good news becomes good. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
You were going to say something, and when I cut you off, so I wanted to hear from you.
Yeah, I had asked him kind of, I mean, what do you mean pretty good? And he was like, well, I'm nice to people. I mean, he's also a very good cook, which we all appreciate. And so he's like, well, I'm always cooking for you guys, hang out, make friends, and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I had asked him what he thought about, and I hadn't gotten any further than this when you had suggested, but I had kind of asked him, like, what do you think about God or being a Christian?
Mm-hmm.
And for context, if you didn't know, Santa Clara University is a Jesuit school, so there's some general semblance of at least kind of familiarity with Catholicism.
Right. That's right. And Catholicism's big on the law, or has been. I was raised Catholic personally, so I know they understand the demands of the law, or used to at least. So
right. Yeah, and so a lot of these kids are somewhat familiar with some of that. And he said, well, I think I'm pretty good. And I just said, okay. And because I hadn't known, I guess, at that time where to go from there.
So if he says, I'm pretty good, and here's the question, do you think God is satisfied with pretty good? That would be another question. Is God satisfied with pretty good? And then you could maybe cite some passages. James says if you break one law, you're guilty of the whole thing. You're a lawbreaker. Here, is the federal or the state government, the local community government, are they satisfied with you being a more or less law-abiding citizen?
I see.
Yeah,
okay.
But the answer, of course, is no. Yeah, if you keep 80% of the law, you're more or less keeping the law, but it's that 20% that's going to get you. So that would be the direction I would choose to go in a circumstance like this.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
That makes sense. Yes, it is. Thank you, Greg.
Okay, Matthew, you're so welcome. A happy Christmas to your brother.
Merry Christmas. You too.
Bye-bye now. Let's go to John in Kalamazoo. John, welcome to Stand to Reason. Hi.
Good evening, Mr. Coco.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can now, yes. Thank you. Hi.
All right, good evening.
So what's on your mind, John in Kalamazoo, or also called Kazoo?
Yeah. So I had a question. So recently I've been reading a tweet from someone saying that I will stop saying bad things because the word is creative. The word of man is creative. And I saw a lot of comments below saying that, oh, yeah, you're right. She's a Christian, that person. She's a Christian. I saw a lot of comments saying, oh, yeah, you're right. We can read in Proverbs 18:21 that the death and the life is in the power of the tongue.
Uh-huh.
But I also saw someone saying that, oh, this is actually the law of attraction, which is taught in the New Age movement.
Right.
So there's a lot of things. I also saw another video saying that, oh, you should not say, I decree and declare, because this is not, it's like a sin, it's not, a Christian shouldn't do that. But my question is, how do you distinguish the power of the tongue, which is spoken in the Bible, with the law of attraction?
Yeah, the law of attraction is a New Age concept, and I actually gave a talk about this, I guess it was about 15 years ago now, but I don't know if it's still available. I think I also wrote an article about it, a solid ground, so it might be on our website. And I'm trying to remember all the details of it, but basically it involves that you have the ability to accomplish certain ends by the way you speak. And by declaring certain things to be so, they become so, and that's because of the power that you have inherent as a kind of divinity and the power of the language of the words you speak. Now, I want to make a distinction here that's really important, because some people will read that notion into the Bible, like you cited Proverbs, life and death are in the power of the tongue, okay? So I'm talking to you, John, okay? I'm going to say, John, die. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. John, die. No, there's nothing about me saying John die that causes you to die,
Mm-hmm.
right? So,
Yeah.
or if you had died, for me to say John live that causes you to live. Proverbs doesn't mean that.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible does not teach that words, that is sounds, have inherent power. That is an occult view of language. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the perfect example of that. Abracadabra. Well, that's a magic word in
Mm-hmm.
the book, in the story. I think Aladdin and his lamp or something like that. And so when we utter abracadabra, then the
Mm-hmm.
magic in the words, I should say the power of the words cause something magical to happen. All
Mm-hmm.
right. But
Yeah.
that is fantasy land. That is not Christianity. Now, can our words hurt?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they can, but they only hurt because they are taken as the intention of the speaker whose opinion we value. So, if your wife were to say, "Are you married, John?"
I'm here. I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, so if your wife were to say, "You're dumb," or "You're stupid," or "You're lazy," or you may just say all those things, well,
Mm-hmm.
the words don't hurt you because I could say the same words and it's
Yeah.
not going to have the same impact that it
Mm-hmm.
would have if your wife told you that, right?
Yeah.
Because it is not the sound, it is the sentiment that is being expressed in the sound by someone whose opinion you value. And this is why Proverbs is talking to us all the time about how we use
Mm-hmm.
our language, okay? A
Yeah.
harsh word stirs up anger. A gentle answer turns away wrath. It is not talking about the power of the words, but the way human beings use language to cause peace or harm in another person's life.
Okay.
Okay? So,
Yeah.
on the Christian view of language, there is no inherent power in the words. Even those who say, well, God spoke the universe into existence. Do you think it was words that caused that to happen? No, it was the will of God expressed in a word.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when the policeman stands on the corner and he yells, "Stop!" All right, to cars
Mm-hmm.
moving forward and they stop. Is the word stop what stopped them, or is it the policeman who stopped them?
Policeman.
The policeman. If I said stop, people won't necessarily stop. If a kid said stop, they wouldn't stop necessarily. I mean, it might be they thought there was some danger. But the point I'm making is the words themselves don't have the power. The power is in the individual who uses words for a certain purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of this stuff that you see and the law of attraction, all of that trades. I mean, there's a lot of things wrong with it, but it trades on the notion that there is power in the words. And if we say the right words, then something magical will happen. So here we go. Abracadabra
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
open sesame. Okay, two famous
Mm-hmm.
magical words from fiction. I think open sesame, maybe that was Aladdin. I don't know, one of those, Arabian Nights or something. But no, there isn't, speak friend and enter or something like that. That was the famous, kind of semi-famous charm to open the doors to Moria in the Lord of the Rings. Speak friend and enter. So
Mm-hmm.
in any event, that happens in fantasy. It doesn't happen in real life. The references to the Bible mean something different. All right.
Yeah, but what do you think? What people said, for example, that if a parent curse on his children or says something bad on his child, it might happen because his father or his mother, because they're like our God in this earth.
Well, I think as parents, we have to be careful how we talk to our children because our words, because they're coming from us as parents, not because there's power in the words, but there's power in what we say. Maybe that's another way of putting it, can deeply influence a child. If we tell a kid he's stupid or ugly or dumb or lazy, and we're always saying these kinds of things as opposed to saying, you can do it, I love you, I'm behind you, I'm on your team, you can see that the messages that we are communicating are going to have an influence on a child's development. But it's the messages we're communicating. It's not strictly the words themselves. If they just saw the word on a sign, stupid, that's not going to cause them to feel bad. But if their parent says that to them, or a teacher, or someone whose opinion they value, that's where it's going to have an impact. Not the word, but the source. Make sense? Okay, buddy?
All right.
Appreciate your call, and happy Christmas to you. Okay, John?
Thank you so much. You too.
All right, bye-bye now. And, last call for the day. This is, no, this couldn't be Mr. Tim, Mr. B. Is it really?
It is. It's Mr. B.
Oh,
Can
Mr.
you?
Oh, Mr. B. It's so nice to hear from you. You were just on last week for the whole show,
was.
and you couldn't stay
was.
away. You couldn't stay
And
away.
You know what? I think we should just make this a weekly deal. You know?
Uh-huh. I'm
yeah.
with you.
So you know what? I have a question that I want to ask you about. Get your thoughts. I'm working on a response to something.
All right.
And I honestly think that this question will be of value to our audience.
All right, good.
Just as kind of preamble here, I posted something recently about Christmas not being pagan. Okay, there's a lot of stuff out there I've noticed, especially online, about Christmas being connected, having some kind of pagan roots.
Okay.
So I posted this thing, and Greg, could not believe how many people have been, I think, deceived about the kind of what they describe as pagan roots of Christmas, from the wreath to the mistletoe to the Christmas tree. I mean, you name it, whatever it is. December 25th, it's all pagan. In fact, one person said Christmas is more pagan than Halloween. Okay, so here's my question to you that I would love to talk to you about. Assuming I don't think the evidence is there. I think when you actually dig deep, all those things, all these so-called pagan rituals, there's no connection to how we do Christmas today. But let's just assume they are. Let's just assume the Christmas tree in my living room. Okay, there was a group of pagans, and they did something similar, thousands of years ago. And now I got a Christmas tree in my living room. Should I be concerned that I am now doing something pagan?
Why did they have a Christmas tree? The pagans, why did they do what they did with the tree?
Well, the claim is that they were doing these things as an act of worship to their God.
Okay, so are you putting a Christmas tree up in your house as an act of worship to any God, even your God?
Absolutely not.
No, of course.
Okay.
So then you're not doing the thing that made the use of the tree bad. There's nothing inherent about a tree that has lights on it. In one case, a person has trees with lights on it, maybe, and they are using it as an idol. In another case, you have somebody that has a tree with lights on it and is not using it as an idol. There's nothing inherent on the tree with lights on it. It's how it's used. Tim, this is a blight, I think, on the thinking of many Christians who are very well-intentioned about this, but very confused. They presume that there is some power in the object. Didn't Paul comment about this? Didn't he say that there is nothing in an idol? There's not. It is nothing. And even meat sacrificed, meat sacrificed in a pagan ritual can be eaten by Christians without creating any moral harm. Now, the moral harm in that discussion had to do with offending people who believe differently, but there was no, and Paul started out by saying, let's just get this clear. There's nothing wrong with eating the meat. You got that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but if
Yeah.
you eat the meat and give offense, there is something wrong with giving offense. This is
Yeah.
true, as you mentioned, Halloween. The interesting thing about the comparison, in a certain sense, Christmas is much more heathen than Halloween, because Halloween was started out, okay, just a little history lesson here. It did not start out as a pagan ritual. It started out as a Christian ritual called
Mm-hmm.
All Hallows Eve. It got paganized afterwards. And a lot had to do with the way the Roman Catholic Church dealt with that particular holiday on October 31st. But it
Mm-hmm.
started out as a religious festival. Now Christmas, it has a much more checkered past in terms of the timing of it and also the
Yeah.
practices. But here's the deal, and you may know about this, Tim, but a lot of people don't. Sometimes, right about now, I'll go on and read some of this stuff on the air so that people can get some background information. Christmas was actually outlawed by the Puritans in the colonies, okay? And there
Mm-hmm.
was the same attitude about it in the UK. There's a movie that we just watched the other night that's called The Man Who Created Christmas or Invented Christmas, right? It's about
Mm-hmm.
Charles Dickens and writing the Christmas Carol. It's a fun movie. I don't know if you've seen it. Isn't it called The Man Who Invented Christmas is the title. It's a lot of fun. Okay, the guy who played Matthew in Downton Abbey, he's the one who plays Dickens. Does a great job. It's a lot of
Okay.
fun. And it's a little bit farcical, but it's fun. But it does make a point. It was Charles Dickens and the impact of that book that made Christmas the wondrous thing that we have come to know it to be. That, along with the American piece that was written called The Night Before Christmas, the poem. Those two things combined together in the early 19th century changed the whole perspective, because before that it was just a drunken brawl, which is why it was outlawed in many places, because people would take occasion to use Christmas is a time of revelry and drunkenness and whatever. But it's not because the event itself, the practice of celebrating Christ itself, was pagan. The fact that
Mm-hmm.
we do it at December 25th, he wasn't born on the 25th of December. We don't know when he was born. It was probably in the spring. But in any event, you got to pick a date, and there was an attempt to be competitive with another pagan festival, the Saturnal or something like that. And so this was a way of drawing Christians away from that pagan event to a more religious thing that they could do and keep them out of harm's way. But of course, the Christians just made the Christmas thing pagan in its practice. Now,
Yeah.
our practices are completely different. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people don't know this, but circumcision that was practiced by the Jews was practiced by the Egyptians before them for a different purpose. God can take an ignoble thing, and even Christians too, and
Yeah.
invest it with other meaning, because it's done differently. It's not ignoble. And I don't know how else to explain it than that, Tim.
Yeah.
I think you're onto something here, and I didn't realize you'd get such a bad response, but as you apparently did, because you talked about
Yeah.
this earlier today when we were chatting. But
Yeah.
I don't understand why Christians cannot see the difference between an object used for an illicit purpose and the same object used for a licit, even noble purpose. I don't
So is
understand
the
that.
so is the main distinction then that in the past, possibly these things were used as in their act of worship. We take those things and we're not, even if they're the exact same thing, the same tree or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There's no act of worship going on. I'm just working on a script here, and I guess in my notes I put my decorated Christmas tree has as much religious significance as my decorated bookshelf behind me.
There you
know
go.
what I'm saying? Like,
sure.
I don't think about when we put up our tree. It's fun. It's like the kids are together. It's something we've done. It's traditional. Now we got a fake tree now.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first. We used to go and cut one down. And that was a traditional thing that we would do, hike through the, the tree farm and all that. And that's why it was fun. Then afterwards, we'd go have a meal together with some family. And there was nothing, I mean, we didn't pause to think about God in that moment. You know what I'm saying? Like it just didn't have
I know.
that.
It's a family activity. This is what I was
right.
talking about at the beginning of the show. You missed it, but I was talking about the spirit of Christmas, which has to do with the way I was using it, at least, is the feelings that we associate with Christmas based on the traditions we've formed over the years. That's the emotional side. And then the substance of Christmas, which is Jesus. And I think for those who are well schooled and raised, the substance and the spirit are they come together. That it's the joy of the advent of God become man that gives us this wonderful feeling. That isn't the way it was for me, and I talked about that. But it is for some people, and that's the best of both worlds. But this is what you're describing when you get the tree as a family, and then you move forward, and it's wonderful for you and for your family. Going back to Paul's statement, and this is the bedrock here for this issue for me, Tim, and that is there is no power in the object. There is no power in the object. You might have caught the earlier call where the caller was asking about language and the words and power. Do words have power? No, there's no power in the words. There's no power in abracadabra or open sesame or speak friend and whatever and enter. There is no power in those words, and there are no power in objects, okay? And so when we use objects for completely different purposes that people might have used in the past for pagan purposes, we aren't participating in those pagan purposes. Hey, Tim, just think of an altar. The altar. The altar where the sacrifices to God were. Every pagan religion had an altar.
Yeah.
They all had altars, is the first I thought of that,
that's
by the way.
good. That's good. Hey, this actually relates to something else. Do we have time? Am I the last guy, or do you have someone else?
You're the last guy, but I was going to read something about something about Jesus and the Advent here. How about this? Oh, of course, you probably need this. You probably need this for coming up.
Well,
why don't you call me? You can't call me back in 2 weeks and we finish this conversation, right?
This will be out. I mean, we could talk about it. But I was just going to say Deuteronomy 12, I'll just read one verse, says, "You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, for every abominable thing the Lord hates, they have done for their gods, even burning their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods." And in this passage is a kind of a warning about to the Israelites, they're going to dispossess, they're going to take the land, don't follow after their gods, don't even inquire about their gods. And what's interesting is you just said something about the altar, and it wasn't everything that they did to their gods, because they had altars to their gods, and there was an altar to the Lord as well.
And they burned their children on those altars, and that's what's being objected to here in chapter 12 of Deuteronomy. Yeah. So those are important distinctions there. Absolutely.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, I will let you go so you can read your thing.
All right, Tim.
And I appreciate you, Greg. And,
thank you, buddy.
This is helpful.
Okay, well, happy Christmas to you, bro.
Yeah.
We'll stay.
Merry Christmas
to
you too.
Bye-bye. Thanks for the call.
See ya.
My good buddy, Tim Barnett. All right, this piece I want to read to you, and I just got about 6 minutes. I'm not sure if I'm going to get it all in, but I'll get a portion of it. So our question remains, why did God come down? What was the reason he became a man? Why did he come? What did he come to earth to do? And I'm reading here out of the Story of Reality, the chapter on the rescue. The story tells us the answer. I want you to think for a moment about what the story says about Christmas. Now, when I say Christmas, I'm not speaking of any of those things that usually come to mind when you think about the birth of Christ. I don't want you to think about, for example, shepherds or wise men or stables or mangers or anything like that. Those things have their place, but they have nothing to do with my point. I am talking about something in the story you probably never noticed. I want you to consider the most important Christmas verse in the story that you will never see on a Christmas card and you'll never hear on a Christmas pageant, because it's not in the accounts of Jesus' birth at all. In fact, it does not appear anywhere in the record of his life. Instead, you find it in a dark and foreboding passage that speaks of blood and sacrifice and death. It is a section of the story recounting a ghastly, grisly system of slaughter, where bulls and goats were bled out, their innocent lives forfeit on behalf of others who were the guilty ones. Now, I think it's obvious to just about everyone that animals can never really pay for people at all. The system of sacrifice God gave to the Hebrews, as important as it was, served as only a kind of a sop, a temporary measure to cover man's moral wound for the moment. It would never do in the long run, and it was not meant to. No, man owes the debt, and in the long run, man, not creatures, must pay. And only a sinless man, someone with no debt of his own, could ever cover the debt of another. And only a man who is more than a man could ever pay for the sins of multitudes. And this brings us to the most important Christmas verse you will never hear on Christmas. Here it is. Therefore, when Christ came into the world, he said, Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. With burnt offerings and sin offerings you were not pleased. Then I said, Here I am. It's written about me in the scroll, I have come to do your will, O God. Note the opening words of this passage, when Christ came into the world. The story is saying that on the first Christmas, in some incredible way, the eternal Son of God in a baby's body said to his Father, Here I am. I will do what you have asked. I accept the body you prepared for me, the body that will bleed out in perfect payment for sin. And this is the answer to our question. This is why Jesus came to earth. God's Son surrendered his sinless human self to be the future unblemished offering to perfectly and completely save sinners. And this we do find in the birth narratives everywhere. God tells Joseph that Mary will give birth to a son, and you will give him the name Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. And in the field, the first Christmas night, the angel tells the shepherds, Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. Zacharias prophesies over his son, the infant John the Baptist, saying John would prepare the way for the Lord and give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins. 30 years later, John points at the Lord Jesus Christ and says, Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Each of these events echoes our unsung Christmas verse, A body you have prepared for me. The Lord, the Christ, the Savior, Emmanuel, God with us, who would die for us, the Lamb of God. So the story tells us the precise reason the Son came to earth, not to teach love and peace and care for the poor, but to submit himself to something unspeakably violent and brutal. That is why every creche ought to have a cross hanging over it, because Jesus was born to die. And on this point, Jesus speaks clearly. God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. The Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. No one has taken it away from me, but I lay it down on my own initiative. And finally, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. I want you to think carefully about Jesus' last statement, because there are 3 questions we must answer to understand his meaning. The first is, what is a ransom? Well, a ransom is the price paid to purchase a hostage and a slave. A ransom buys a body. Second, whose body does Jesus buy with the ransom? He buys those who are held hostage. He pays a price to purchase sinners, rebels, and slaves. Finally, what is the price he will pay? Jesus will buy bodies by surrendering his own body. A body you prepared for me. He will sacrifice himself to save others. And this, my friends, is the foundation for Christmas. For Jesus coming into the world. No, he didn't come in on December 25th. We choose a birthday to celebrate because of the magnanimity of the event itself. God come down. God getting small. God coming to earth. God with us. Emmanuel. So on this Christmas, may God keep you in Him and help you to understand the fullness of what He has done on our behalf by coming to earth, taking on flesh, becoming a man, dwelling among us, filled with grace and peace. Greg Kokel here for Stand to Reason. Give Him heaven. Bye-bye.